Okay, so hello everybody and welcome to today's training. We are going to be talking about transportation today. This is one of the required trainings by childcare licensing. So while it'll go by pretty fast, it is one that we do have to talk about. Again, for those that don't know, my name is Annaleah Hilker. I am on the managing team with Upkid. So let's get into this. So the first thing to know about transportation is some providers actually offer transportation to and from school for the older kids. If that is the situation, the daycare provider needs to make sure that any child that uses that transportation has a permission slip that is signed before they're able to use it. And then that permission slip needs to stay documented on site for the duration of the time that the child is there, so that if any childcare licensing people come in, they are able to look at that documentation. If the provider does allow transportation through their service, there are certain requirements that the vehicle has to meet. One of those is that it has to have an enclosed roof, or it needs to be an enclosed vehicle. This simply means, again, the roof, and it has to have doors that are actually connected to the vehicle. But this does not mean that the windows always have to stay rolled up. They actually encourage that you roll down windows before you use air conditioning for some of those kids that have higher sensitivity needs. The vehicle must be equipped with safety restraints, so seat belts, car seats, baby chairs, anything like that. The vehicle also must be currently registered, and it has to have passed a safety inspection. It needs to be kept clean, and it needs to have first aid supplies, as well as any body fluid supplies to clean up. Whether there's an accident or if a child has a bloody nose, anything like that needs to be kept in the vehicle. When it talks about the vehicle needing to be kept clean, this means just your daily use type things. It doesn't have to be spotless all the time, but it does need to be kept sanitized, and there can't be weeks and weeks worth of buildup in the vehicle. So talking about safety restraints, the safety restraints need to meet age requirements according to Utah law. They must be properly installed and in safe and working condition. So here you can see just different examples of those age appropriate safety restraints for your infants, and typically up until they're 2 years old, they're in a rear facing car seat. Then you've got the forward facing, your boosters, and then for your older kids, just the seat belt. When it comes to vehicle drivers, any and all vehicle drivers must be 18 or older to provide transportation. They must have a valid driver's license. That's also specifically for the type of vehicle they're being used. So if they're driving a bigger bus, they will need the CDL license as well. Vehicle drivers must have in the vehicle emergency contact information for every child. And they also must ensure that every child is individually seat belted. So part of that safety restraint is making sure that they aren't double buckling. You don't have one kid sitting on top of another child to share a seat belt. They all must be individually secured. The temperature inside the vehicle must stay between 60 and 85 degrees. Again, they will encourage you using windows if the children get hot, but then also making sure that the AC is used if it is still too hot with the windows rolled down. The vehicle driver must ensure that a child is never left unattended in a vehicle, whether this is while they're still in the vehicle or if they have another caregiver in the vehicle, somebody also always has to be there if there's a child there. They also must make sure that children stay seated when the vehicle is moving. And then they are never allowed to leave the keys in the ignition if they are not in the driver's seat. This prevents, one, kids being dumb, but two, also other people coming into the vehicle and being able to drive off. And then lastly, the driver must ensure that the doors are locked during transportation. There is an exception to this rule. Some buses have a system where if the doors are locked, it won't allow the driver to drive as part of their safety precautions. But typically, vehicles have to have their doors locked during transportation. When it comes to emergency contact information, this contact information cannot be counted if the information is kept on an electronic device. The reason behind that being, if there is an accident and the driver is unconscious or worst case scenario, they have passed, medical personnel need to still be able to easily access emergency contact information. And if it's on an electronic device, the device could be locked. It might be in a folder that they don't know how to easily access. Anything like that will just slow things down. So with the emergency contact information, it does need to be kept paper copy in a binder is probably the best way to do that. Parents as transportation. This is one that will also apply to caregivers. If the daycare ever does ask you to provide transport. If the provider is making arrangements for parents to provide transportation, whether that's to a field trip or some activity that they're going on, the parent has to meet the requirements that all other drivers would, and the vehicle has to meet all of those requirements as well. The parent also needs to have completed a background check and any and all other training that any caregiver would be expected to also complete. As well, the parent must be CPR and first aid certified. So again, these are if the provider is the one that's making arrangements for a parent to provide transportation. If parents are making arrangements for other parents to pick up or drop off their child, these rules don't actually apply. You can treat it just like a normal carpool. So their vehicle wouldn't technically have to meet the requirements. And that's mostly just, again, because if the provider is making arrangements for it, it's on daycare time. Those children are technically clocked in. So it's just safety precaution for them. And then last thing, public transportation. If the provider is willing to do this, they are allowed to let the kids use public transportation. If that is the case, they still need to have permission slips signed for any children that will use public transportation. The provider also needs to ensure that there is an adult supervising them. So they'll need to send a caregiver through the public transportation with the child. Because of that, the child to teacher ratios will still need to be enforced. So you wouldn't be able to have more than 4 toddlers for one caregiver to make sure that you are actively being able to ensure the safety of these kids. And then lastly, that caregiver that is with the child needs to have the emergency contact for the children with them. Again, this would be in the paper form. It wouldn't be just in their phone, because if they aren't able to access that emergency contact, somebody else does. So that is pretty simple transportation. Are there any questions or comments with anything about this?
I have a question. Has anybody here ever been asked to provide transportation for a child at a center that you worked at? And you can answer in the chat or just unmute. Oh, great. Fatih, it looks like you were asked to pick up the kids, but you walked. So that's great. That you guys could have just walked there. So I know I asked that question because I know normally they won't ask an Upkid teacher, but they have asked us for drivers in the past. Have asked Upkid for anybody that could drive. So yeah, I was just wondering if that has happened to anybody yet. But this is good training, Annaleah. It's good things to know in case we do need to do that.
Yeah. Any other questions before I stop the recording?